Well, welcome to our second event in the Women's Health and Entrepreneurship series. This happens once a month on the second Wednesday of the month, so we hope you guys can come and join us next month for our next event, and the speakers will be announced soon. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this series came about. So about a year and a half ago, the New England Medical Innovation Center, was founded by Anne Geary and Alydia Schmults, came about, and we help pre-funded companies prepare for funding from VC angels while helping them succeed in a very regulated med tech industry. We are specific to med tech, therapeutics, connected products, and digital health products. During our time meeting with a lot of these companies over the past year and a half, we started to find a pattern of meeting a lot of women entrepreneurs and a lot of people also working in women's health. And we thought, why not celebrate that and also let these people know that other people are going through these same journeys of entrepreneurship and women's health right in everyone's backyard. So this event is all about, one, celebrating all these wonderful women, all these wonderful people, and two, informing all of you about what's going on right in your backyard. This event is set up with two speakers. Each speaker is going to have 15 minutes, and then after our first speaker, we'll have about 5 minutes of question and answer. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and you can ask our speakers. Make sure you also check out the tater tots in the back for everyone, so please eat them and also get a drink, and we'll enjoy the evening. We want to give a huge shout out to the Rhode Island Foundation and Zymetica for sponsoring this series. We are looking for more sponsors, so if you know of anyone that would support an initiative like this, you can pick up a sponsorship packet at the registration table and bring it to them. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Anne Geary Schmults. She is the Director of Business Development at Alydia Health. Anne has worked in the medical device world for 17 plus years and has experience with taking small startups from clinical trials through FDA approval, market launches, and successful IPOs and acquisitions. She also has experience working with large medtech companies in the new product testing, evaluation, and sales management. Today, Anne will take us through her personal story that led her to have an interest in working in women's health and how her company, Alydia Health, is making childbirth safer for all women. Please welcome Anne.
Thank you, Danielle, and also to Aiden and to Mimic for sponsoring the Women's Health series. I'm excited to be here. And I'm also really excited to share the work with Alydia Health as well as my own journey into the world of women's health. I'm Anne Geary Schmults, and I'm currently Director of Business Development for Alydia Health. Alydia Health, we have, in a snapshot, we have a really big mission. Our mission is to make childbirth safer for mothers everywhere, in both the U.S. and globally. It's noted that every 6 minutes, a mother dies of postpartum hemorrhage around the world. And so our goal is to send mothers home with their babies and also with their own blood as well. There's been early clinical validation as a snapshot for Alydia Health. We did a first-in-women study in Indonesia, validating the technology that Alydia Health has developed to address postpartum hemorrhage. And currently, we have an IDE study underway in the U.S. We have a 510K pathway. The market is measured at about $400 million in the U.S. and even bigger globally. But much more importantly, our goal is to make childbirth safer for mothers, both in the U.S. and also globally. As a background of why a career in women's health resonates with me is I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and this is my father. He's now 89, so when he was a little bit younger, but he was an OBGYN at Ochsner and he taught at Tulane. And I looked forward to every day when we'd have our big family dinners and he'd talk about really primarily and only the happy stories of childbirth. How many babies were born each day, how many girls, how many boys, multiples. And I looked forward to each day and kind of getting the update and hearing about his work day. It really wasn't until 2004 when I had my first child and I had a severe infection. It took a long time to recover. I started talking to other peers and heard that other women's birth stories about how many complications there really were. At the time, I was living in San Francisco, and my neighbor across the street, who had her first child about 6 months before me, had a postpartum hemorrhage. And it took her a really long time to feel good and to be able to take care of herself and take care of her baby. As a kind of a career background, I worked in Northern California for about 17 years. And I worked for 2 large companies, for Johnson & Johnson, and at the tail end of my career in orthopedic spinal implants, I worked for Stryker. And in between, I actually worked for 2 early stage companies where I realized that I truly had an entrepreneurial spirit, and I liked working for early stage companies where we had an aligned goal, it required flexibility, it required problem solving, and everyone wore a lot of different hats and was just moving really fast. I felt lucky to have had the opportunity to work for Spine Tech, which created a new technology for spinal implant fusions. Spine Tech was there kind of on the ground floor when they were coming out of their FDA study. We did the commercialization launch. The company went public and was later acquired by a large company. Many of the entrepreneurial people left. I left, and I got the idea of the next company that I went to work for in a venue very similar to this. There was a venue called Forum for Women Entrepreneurs in Life Sciences at Stanford, and women would get up and pitch their ideas. And at the time, there was a woman named Karen Talmadge who had developed a company called Hyphon, and she was funding it with her own capital. And she had developed with Mark Riley a balloon technology to stabilize compression fractures for people with osteoporosis. And so the goal was at that time to keep these patients mobile, right? Because when someone's bed rest, one problem begets another. And just from the first time I heard her idea, I knew I wanted to go to work for Hyphon. So I feel really lucky to have worked with them in the early stage at the tail end of their FDA study. And later they were acquired by Medtronic. I left before that. And then I had my own interlude where I took some time off of work. I had 3 children. We had a cross-country move and then a second family move up to Providence. And in about 2016, I started kind of re-engaging with many of my peers and kind of thinking about what I really wanted to do. And I think I knew that I wanted to diversify from the world of spinal implants. The market at that time was saturated, and I really wanted to do something at that time that resonated with me personally. At that time, a friend of mine who had been working at the Fogarty Institute in Northern California, which is an institute that consults with very early stage companies, much like what Anne is doing. She was consulting with a company that had asked her to become the CEO, Impress Technologies, now Alydia Health. And she called me and said, I have found this amazing technology to work with that stops postpartum hemorrhage. We have early stage clinical validation, and we just had the authorization to start an FDA study. And she said, we need someone to help us find the right partners for this research project, because ultimately, finding the right partners in a project like this, it's very critical to the technology advancing, and also to do the proper research to evaluate both the safety and effectiveness of the product. So I thought, this is something that resonated with me. It was an entrepreneurial company, and I loved how very early stage things were at that time, 2 years ago. So 2017, I went to work for what was Impress Technologies. It's now Alydia Health. And that same year, there was a lot of press coverage about the fact that we have a problem in the U.S. with maternal mortality. We are actually the only developed country where we have one of the higher rates of all the developed countries, about 10%. But there was all of a sudden this national recognition that why are our rates not dropping? Why is this a problem in 2017, 2018, 2019? Many National Geographic, NPR, U.S. News and World Report, they did a lot of articles on this and really raised awareness. And unfortunately, in the developing world, 1 in every 200 babies go home without a mother. This number comes from 2015 in sub-Saharan Africa. But looking also on this chart, the U.S., we're still behind Canada and Europe in our high maternal mortality rates. We also have a little bit of a different problem. We're lucky in some ways that we have access to blood, in many ways, that we have access to blood products. But due to kind of a confluence of risk factors, the maternal morbidity rates have been going up, and the transfusion rates have increased to 1 to 2% of women in the U.S. Having children are not going home with their own blood. So over the last 20 years, the blood transfusion rates are increasing in childbirth in the U.S. So 75% of women, of mothers in the U.S. have at least one risk factor. 10% are diagnosed with postpartum hemorrhage, and 1 to 2% of women have a blood transfusion after delivery. Some of these risk factors are C-sections, also multiples, increased maternal age, I was definitely one of those people, and induced or augmented labor as well. Postpartum hemorrhage is excessive bleeding after childbirth, and in a healthy delivery, the uterus contracts into and onto itself. This contraction stops the bleeding, but in a fatigued or atonic uterus, the uterus is unable to contract. This postpartum hemorrhage can result in blood transfusion if the blood products are available, a hysterectomy, and in severe cases, death. And I actually have a short animated video of the JADA system developed by Alydia Health. It's a silicone loop that goes into the uterus that's porous, and the vacuum seal just sits right outside the cervical os, is attached to slight vacuum, and what it does is it induces the uterus to contract into and onto itself and to stop the bleeding. The device stays in for about an hour or minimum, and then right now in our FDA study, we have a verification step. Once the vacuum is removed, the device stays in for an additional 30 minutes, which is really just part of our it's a verification step at this point in the FDA study. Another way of looking at how the device works in this 3D view, it's just a soft silicone loop that has about 20 pores of different sizes, and it's placed inside the uterus. The vacuum seal sits outside the cervix, and it's a gentle vacuum that's usually a wall suction, or in a rural setting can be a portable vacuum suction that attaches to this. So the goal is, again, to contract the uterus to stop the bleeding. The story of how Alydia Health was developed, I think is really interesting. It was two engineering students who were seniors at Cal Poly, and they had a senior project in their entrepreneurial studies to address an unmet global health need, and they addressed the problem with postpartum hemorrhage. They designed, they entered a contest called the PATH contest in Seattle, and they designed a new balloon. And what balloon technology does is it fills the space and hopefully stops the bleeding. And they did not win in this contest, and they came back and spoke to their professors and said, we actually should not have looked at the problem the same way everyone else is looking at it. We should have looked at it differently. How can we get the uterus to do what it does in a healthy state, to contract into and onto itself? And that's how the JADA system was developed. These two engineers went on to have a different career, but a woman who was part of the entrepreneurial program, Jessie Becker, actually took the idea into the Fogarty Innovation Institute, and over a period of time since 2010 developed the idea. She did the non-clinical testing with a group of engineers there, raised enough money to do the first in-woman study in Indonesia. And this was a real turning point for the company because while everything was validated in a non-clinical setting, it was really in the clinical setting when our medical director and our engineering team went to Indonesia. In the first 10 women, the bleeding stopped in all 10 cases within 2 to 3 minutes. And this was documented in the Green Journal and published in July of 2016. And so it was really with this data that we were able to move forward and actually get approval from the FDA to start clinical study. We did have additional data in Uganda that we had mirrored the same results of the bleeding stopping within a few minutes. And then we decided to start an FDA study in the US first before we hope to, once hopefully it's approved in the US, then we'll do a study globally, perhaps with the WHO, and address the global needs. I'm going to skip one here. So just like most startups, I've had a lot of different responsibilities and worn many hats, but my main responsibility has been this, is to find the right research partners for this study. We are really lucky to have Dr. Mary Dalton at Columbia. She's chair of the OBGYN department. She is our lead study PI and our leader. She talks about that her goal is to put the M back in MFM, maternal fetal medicine, to remember the mom and the importance of taking care of the mom. She's done extensive research in the area of postpartum hemorrhage, or actually resolving postpartum hemorrhages. So these are research sites across the country. They're really on the East Coast. And just last week, I was in Washington, D.C. We were training and opening MedStar in D.C. And our study PI there, Dr. Sarah Iqbal, said when she introduced the research project to all of her residents and fellows, she said, this is a rare opportunity that we get to do research that helps our patients here at home in DC, but also would potentially help mothers around the world. So I think we have a lot of researchers that are really passionate about studying postpartum hemorrhage, but they also realize that this work that needs to be done in the US, that potentially they could have something that would help mothers around the world as well. Right now, the treatment algorithm, there are really 3 stages. The conservative stage is to prophylactic treatment. Many women respond really well to this, to uterotonics, uterine massage. The challenge can be sometimes not everybody responds, or it's a trial and error thing. They'll mix various uterotonics, some things work and some things don't. If a woman does not respond to this, then the clinicians usually move on to the second phase, and this is currently, there are many balloon technologies on the market. There's also just traditional uterine capping with gauze that can mask the bleeding. It can also, some of these need to stay in for 24 hours. This is where the JADA system would be introduced in the treatment algorithm. Currently, our inclusion-exclusion criteria are in the vaginal delivery. The patient will lose 500, maximum 1,000 cc's of blood, or in a C-section, 1,000 to 1,500 cc's of blood. Phase 3 is a more severe case that's not responding to the other approaches, and that's where a patient could have a B-Lish suture or a hysterectomy, and that could clearly permanently affect fertility. There are other losses here. Really, deliveries are not, hospitals lose money on healthy deliveries, and they lose twice as much money on postpartum hemorrhages. So we believe there's a loss to the hospitals that's greater than $1 billion. So our goal with the JADA system is also to, to save mothers' lives, but also to, I think that ultimately it will save hospitals money as well. The JADA system, the goal is to encourage the natural contraction of the uterus to also stop the bleeding and the rapid results. We are early on in our study. We have 17 patients with a goal of 96, and we're encouraged by the results that they've been mirroring our earlier clinical results. Some of the comments that some of our investigators have made, I think it was early 2018, one of our investigators at University of Utah fellow said that technology is badass. So that was a big compliment for all of us. But another investigator said, we love the JADA. Another investigator recently said at a site that recently opened that it works better than I thought. We're still early days, and we're looking forward to, as we're opening more sites and having more patients enrolled. Right now, we think the market is about 400 million, and the global market is even larger. But more importantly, we want to save mothers' lives, and we want to help families around the world. So the goal of Alydia Health is obviously to address the global health crisis, but also the crisis here in the U.S. to reduce the rate of postpartum hemorrhage, and also to save our healthcare system some money as well. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the story of the work of Alydia Health. And I think we have about 5 minutes for any questions.
Hi, Brian from I'm wondering, you talked a little about why.
Well, I mean, the last 2 years I sat through the CDC maternal safety and mortality meeting. It's a 1 full day meeting at ACOG, and a lot of different, theories. One of the main theories is that there has not been a consistency of approach to treatment. For example, one of the things that's happening is California has created safety bundles and checklists and a more consistent approach. Some of the clinicians feel like this is not being addressed or treated early enough. There's also the risk factors. It can happen in any setting. It's not necessarily someone with the risk factors, but a lot is being done to create safety bundles, consistency around hospitals around the country, and to create more consistent checklists, but also to be addressing the problem earlier. That's in the risk factors, given that 75% of the women in the U.S. have one risk factor, are still significantly high. But I think that with the increased awareness, at least all the investigators we're working with on many different levels are doing everything they can to reduce this rate and address. They're very concerned why it's this high. And a lot of it is also changing their hemorrhage protocols in the hospital. So we hope that this technology will come into play as well and help.
I know that African American women have a higher
Yeah.
Is that because of the hemorrhage, or is that overall, or is that due to statistics?
I don't know the exact statistics, but this was addressed last year at the CDC meeting and certainly has been in the press a lot. And one of the beliefs is basically the overall stress of racism in the US. They've evaluated everything from a breakdown of education level, quality of care, but it is looked at and was the focus of the conversation of last year's CDC meeting. I know this year they're talking about rural health as well because the hemorrhage rates are high. But the rates are 3 times as high right now for African American women in the US than they are for Caucasian women. And so that is being looked at very closely.
Along the same lines, the typical 1 in 200 women globally that die from childbirth, you know how much of a portion of that is due to the hemorrhage issue?
Yes, I think that the rate, it depends in sub-Saharan Africa, the rate of maternal mortality is getting close to 30%. It is broken down as hemorrhage is one of the highest factors in it. I know in the US it's about 10%, but globally I do not know the exact number. It's one of the high predictors. That Meg might know that too. This is right up her alley. 30%. Yes.
I was just curious what went into the selection process for the test sites.
It's in Indonesia. I think that was actually before my time that the clinical operations team, they were getting sites that had done research also with US-based companies, and also they looked at a number of different sites. They also looked at Mexico, does, and in a teaching institution as well.
Amazing work, obviously. I was wondering what's next for WH&ES. So I obviously focused on what's after that. Is it other products that you guys have in mind, or is it maybe more to the health hemorrhage?
We are a tiny one product company right now, and it's all about the study. You know, every day, everything we're talking about, thinking about, and doing, it's really enrolling the study and supporting the study. We have calls regularly with all of our PIs, and also the research associates are such a critical part of this. Even though our goal is to have the study done by the middle of 2020, we don't, you know, we're not even really talking about commercialization. And we do know, as far as you know, we've been approached by the WHO to do a study with them once this is completed. But I would think there may be some other iterations of the data system, but again, from business development, I should check with our CEO, but right now we're just fully thinking about this trial and supporting this trial. We are probably going to open 1 to 2 more US sites and possibly a site or 2 outside of the US as well. Yeah. No, Rhode Island is not. And we have 3 sites in New York, but Rhode Island is not, unfortunately, participating. No, and not in Boston. So we have, it is a challenging study. A lot of patients are considered to enroll, and we're not breaking it out just by patients that are predisposed or have a high risk. So there's so many components that go into site selection, and it's a lot of work for these sites too. So sometimes it's finding a PI who just people really wants to do this research, but we are in touch in Rhode Island locally, and we are in touch in Boston who may then do follow-up studies for us. So we're probably thinking about kind of our next research study.
This is a fascinating, simple solution. What's really, really great. And you said it's a one product for this company. Can you speak a little bit about the funding avenue went through? Because I know an ID study like this is extremely expensive. So how were you guys able to go this quick or go into such an extensive study?
Jesse Becker, who was the student as part of the entrepreneurial program, did the first round, and with the support of the Ferguson Institute, and the current CEO, who had worked for the Ferguson Institute, and just completed his last fall the B round. And we actually have a fantastic group of investors, Global Health Investment Fund, where they invest in technology that helps people in the U.S., but also they only invest in things that help in the developing world as well. And so we're really grateful. And one of their LPs is actually the Gates Foundation. But so, you know, it's not an easy task for sure. We're still in the B round phase. We've completed the B round at this time. But, you know, so far the clinical results are very encouraging results. I think it's
Is this something you see becoming just like part of the process of childbirth, like and just integrated as a method of just getting familiar with across the board?
in our sites that we're working with, the sites that acknowledge that they have a huge problem. Not everybody in our list is a huge problem with postpartum hemorrhage, but some sites will acknowledge that their rates are going up and they're not sure why. And they have hemorrhage carts that do hemorrhage drills. You know, they are calling for it early in the run. They may or may not use it. And so, you know, it's all going to be contingent on the results of the study. But there are hemorrhage carts in most labor delivery units and ORs that, you know, have, you know, basically these various phases of the treatment algorithm in them. So, you know, the goal is just for this to be part of the treatment algorithm. And right now, every woman responds to something different. So it'd be nice, many of our clinicians say it'd be nice to have something else in our armamentarium that potentially stop the bleeding.
a very small company, what that looks like. And then this timeline that we just have for 4 or 5 years, and where's the, at what point would commercialization?
Well, with Jessie Becker, who's kind of was working with the company part-time once she graduated from college, that started in 2010, and she was doing other things. It was really in 2014 when they did the first in-woman study. I think that, really the technology was validated at that point. So at that point, there were several consultants and, a few full-time employees. In the last year, there's been a significant number of hires. There were a combination of full-time employees based in Menlo Park and consultants. I'm kind of the East Coast person, and so we've just really heavily hired on the clinical operations team, and are continuing to hire there. So as far as what commercialization looks like, our goal is to finish the study by 2020, middle of 2020. And so it just depends upon how the study goes, and once the results are sent to the FDA and then 510(k) approval, then we approach commercialization. And probably what we're seeing in our more urban centers first. But we're very quickly want to do this study with the WHO, and we get emails every day from around the world, people in India wanting technology. So we very quickly want to do studies also out of the US.
Awesome. So our next speaker is Meg Wirth, the founder of Maternova. Meg is an expert in maternal health innovation. Her prior roles, she's advised dozens of entrepreneurs and startups, worked at the Rockefeller Foundation on global health equity, and secured a Gates Foundation grant to start a global health venture fund. This has led Meg to her most recent role as Director of Health and Wellness at the local social enterprise greenhouse. Today, Meg will be sharing the story of the seed she planted over 20 years ago that led her to the creation of her own social enterprise, a pioneering e-commerce platform for women's health technologies, Maternova.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here and for that amazing first presentation on Alydia. We've been following Alydia since they were in press in, I think, 2010. So I'm going to tell you about Maternova, and we were asked to make this be a little bit more of a storytelling, about our own careers and what brought us to these ventures. It's so wonderful to be speaking with another, not just obstetric technology, but one focused on postpartum hemorrhage, which you hear about has long been my personal obsession, I think you could say. So I want to tell you a bit about, just very quickly, where this company is right now, and then go into the seeds or the inspiration for it, and really underlying the story is just the role of serendipity and sort of never knowing how different strands in your life are going to come together. Because I can tell you, I certainly never planned to start a company focused on obstetric and neonatal health. I was a visual and environmental studies, basically an art and anthropology major, and I was interested in gender. That was, that was my thing. But today, Maternova is a 9-year-old company. We're still a startup, but we are building a platform to accelerate the commercialization and distribution of technologies like Alydia around the world. We started with a focus on really on Africa and Haiti, on the lowest income countries, because the problem of maternal health is the most severe in those countries. And though we started with a focus on those countries and on very small providers, when we first started, we were sending sample packages of innovations with traveling midwives overseas. So it was kind of a very small experimental idea. And what happened was the more we listened, and we were sort of trained in entrepreneurship to listen to the market, we kept hearing things like, we don't really want that, but do you have this? Or has anyone ever invented X, Y, and Z? And so the idea started to get bigger than it was when it was first started, and the market started to get bigger. In other words, our understanding of the market and how big it was began to grow. So from our calculations, and believe me, there's no industry book on what the market is for obstetric and newborn health technologies, but in emerging and developing countries, our calculations using UN and other World Bank reports and market reports out of Europe are that it's a $26 billion market, so that people are spending in these countries, they're spending that much on devices and diagnostics to try to address this issue. So that's what we're tackling, and our central thesis is that there are hundreds of innovations coming online from universities and classes just like the one that was described by Alydia. Increasingly, these classes are in Uganda and India and Indonesia as well, but that the time it takes once these products get through the regulatory pathway, the time it takes to trickle through language and health systems is 7 to 8 years, during which many of the products, the ideas die on the vine. When they finally get there, you know, it's 7, 8, 9 years later, and we're looking to accelerate that time frame. This is, I'm going to get to the story part in a minute, but this is the pain that we're solving, the unclear path to market that I just described, the inefficiency, the inefficiency that exists between all of the device and diagnostic startups and even the corporates who are doing little pieces of this in-house and in some of their research labs. They're all looking for a market. The procurement agents, the Ministries of Health, the frontline doctors, the providers, the nurses, they're all looking for the products, but there's no trusted site where you can go to find proven tested products, and we're building that site. And that's what Maternova is. So this is a little light, but I'm talking here about seeds of the idea that became a company. And people always ask, you know, what was your aha moment? For me, there wasn't an aha moment at all. It was a series of sequential steps on a ladder. And it wasn't really a ladder, it was like a climbing a mountain, and some of the pieces came together. So the first moment was in 1997 in Indonesia. I think all good things start in Indonesia. The obsession with postpartum hemorrhage began, and that obsession, I can talk a little bit about that, but it's something about how unjust it is that someone would bleed to death in the course of giving life, and how we should be able to solve this in 2019. We should be able to solve this problem. And then in 2008, I can talk briefly about this. This is right when I was starting the company. I read about a female counterintelligence officer who was working from home at night because she had kids in the day, and she was finding terrorists online from her home office. And something about that just blew my mind and was incredibly inspirational for me and got me through about 2 years of working from a home desk. And then in 2009, I was still doing some consulting, but I became obsessed with this suit that was invented by NASA in the 70s and had percolated its way. In this case, it took 25 years to get to the global health market, and for people to do a clinical trial to show that this was a way you could stop postpartum hemorrhage. It's much less elegant than the Alydia, but it is something that we're now distributing in over 50 countries, and it's a non-invasive, it's a suit that wraps around the woman. So let me just go to, so this is in India, in Indonesia, in Borneo, and I became very interested in safe motherhood. I went to work with a USAID funded project. I was placed in literally the middle of nowhere. They couldn't figure out where to have me stay and it would be safe in a Muslim country, so I lived in a maternity hospital. So I lived in a patient room that they set aside for me, and my and I don't have pictures because this was before digital phones. And my phone, my only way to call home was in the labor room, which no one seemed to have a problem about the fact that there was no infection control or anything else. So I would call home and I would usually be holding the baby and a woman would be delivering over in the corner. So I observed a lot of things, starting with the lack of infection control, but then also in the days, we would go up the rivers and go visit traditional midwives and newly trained midwives, and we were basically trying to figure out why is the maternal mortality rate so high in this country and what can be done to change it. And this is where I got a couple key learnings. One was the role of a trained nurse, trained midwife could save a mother. The second was, at this point, I don't know if anyone's heard of the HemoQ, but they were just rolling out the HemoQ point of care device to test for anemia. And it kind of blew my mind because most of the other things we were doing in this project were, well, they were soft qualitative work, which is very important. But the idea that you could go up a river and take the whole village's anemia levels and figure out who might be at greater risk for postpartum hemorrhage was fascinating to me. So I sort of made a little note about point of care diagnostics and how this might change everything. And then the third piece was, we were up 4 hours in the jungle. A woman starts to have postpartum hemorrhage. So the statistics are, you have 2 hours. If that woman is already anemic, you have 2 hours to get her to someone who can do something about the bleeding, or she will die. So, that is a very obvious problem. And I remember just sort of sitting there. I think what I was trying to imagine, but had absolutely no way to do it, would be drones. Like, I just kept thinking, like, how can we transport these women out more quickly? And one thing they could do now is they could send in a uterotonic by a drone, and we are doing this in Tanzania and elsewhere. But it just got all my wheels turning, and got me very, very obsessed about this issue of postpartum hemorrhage and why were women still dying from this age-old condition. The final thing that happened here is that one of the lead OBGYNs, the Indonesian OBGYNs, who got to the hospital herself to deliver, died in childbirth. And then I was like 28 or something at the time. I sort of raised, put my hands up and I was like, I don't think the answers lie here exactly. So that was a lot of what stuck with me. Fast forward, I tried to come at this from a number of different angles, working on the UN Millennium Project, where it was the first time we stated a global goal to reduce maternal health. And then I worked on this Global Health Venture Fund, was looking at hundreds of deals in global health and noticing there are so many interesting innovations happening in obstetrics and neonatology, but none of these VC guys seem to be interested. And so I was collecting them in my mind, and that is where some of the seeds for Maternova started to gather. And I thought, well, what if we put them all, like, who's cataloging all these things? Who's keeping track? Who knows when they're going to be available, when they're going to be commercially available and out of the research and development stage. So we started by just creating a knowledge library. We put up, I think, 12 innovations. One of them was this non-pneumatic anti-shock garment. And the response that we got, when we started to build social media, we started to hear from people, it wasn't this sort of comment of, well, oh, that's so interesting, tell me more about that detail of that. It was, tell me more about that product, how can I buy it, and when can you get it here? And we said, well, we're not, that's not what we do, we're just putting up information, and then it just kept coming, from every corner of the world, from Madagascar to Russia to Colombia. We need this product, how can we get it? And so that is sort of the next step of what happened when we founded in 2009. We got feedback from the market for a long time. It was like a long time. And there was a lot of language issues and all of that. But by 2012, we sort of shifted to say, well, we can't find someone who's solving this problem, so let's do it. Let's do it in-house. And we fast forward to basically figuring out, well, how do you buy it? How do you ship it? How do you get it to the destination? We made a lot of mistakes. But today, we've gotten to the point where we know which carriers to use. We know how to get it past regulatory. So we have 40 products that we've sold into, as I said, over 50 countries. And we started with these tiny little customers, these traveling midwives, and have through mostly bootstrapping and some seed funding, we have started to serve. By 2015, we were selling to Ministries of Health, selling to major humanitarian organizations like Doctors Without Borders, International Federation of the Red Cross, and just building the reputation of the brand. So what the brand stands for is, the lower right, the Maternova brand is basically that you can trust that we've done our homework on this product. Not only have we looked at all the clinical studies, reviewed them, but we've also tested this in our field test partner sites. And so that's the current status of the company. We have about 60 products still in the pipeline that need to get vetted to make sure that we can sell them to the end users. And then we have a lot of work to do. We're launching a Latin America site in about 2 weeks in Spanish. So how much time do I have?
You could 5 minutes. Yeah.
So I'll just finish up quickly with a little bit more just of the inspiration, because it is a long journey, and I have found, like I said, there wasn't one aha moment, but there's these sort of surges of inspiration. And this little suit, for whatever reason, I can't really explain why, but this little suit captured my imagination, and it's another reason the company was started. So the suit was invented in the 70s by NASA to answer the question of how would we stop hemorrhage in space? I don't know how. Anyway, that was the research question. It wasn't about obstetrics, but a really interesting. So they used to use this in ambulances, and then it was replaced by other technology. But long story short, a really neat researcher from California, Sue Ellen Miller, took 10 years to convince the World Health Organization, the global health community, that this device could save a woman's life. So basically, that 2-hour window that I told you about, this suit, if you get it on, can stabilize a woman for 24, 48 hours if you need to stabilize her. So that answers that question that we had in Indonesia of if they're 4 hours up into the jungle, and you can't get the medicine and you have to transport them on a boat or on a door, like a piece of wood, to a hospital, how do you stabilize them? So this answered that question. But the funny thing was, even though it had gone through all the clinical trials, amazing results, 40% reduction in postpartum death from postpartum hemorrhage, we still talk to people every day, OB/GYNs who've never heard about this device. So that becomes our driving question. They did all these things right. They worked so hard, and people who know about it, and then there's all the people that don't. And you think about it, there are some 50% of births still occur outside the hospital worldwide. So you've got a lot of women delivering a long way from a hospital. And this little device is only one of our 40 products. That was definitely my favorite. And I think you're maybe not supposed to get attached to medical devices, but I do. So then I would just end with, I think the media, I know that, the intention that by 2016, the U.S. press started to pay attention to maternal death, and that was so exciting because I can tell you in 2009, nobody was talking about maternal mortality either at the international global health level or at the U.S. level. And so sometimes when someone interesting would pay attention, it was very inspirational. And this is maybe a grim way to end, but I thought it was very helpful for me at the time. This is a war photographer named Alydia Health. She's won a lot of awards. She does frontline battle work in Afghanistan and elsewhere, and she took on the issue of maternal mortality. This was happening right at a time when maybe I was sort of lagging in my interest, or not interest, but my passion, and I was getting tired. So this is the story of Mama Sese. She's like 18 years old. She gives birth to that adorable little baby there, and this is the story that any of us who are working in global maternal health or national health are after. Everything's fine. And what happens is they take their eye off the mom, they're looking at the baby. She starts to get very sick. It happens very quickly, it can happen in a matter of hours. They're rushing her out. You can see they don't have any equipment. This is like a district level hospital, and within like an hour she's passed away. And this is her own mother, who's probably 39 years old, hearing what's happened back in the village. And then they go on, the photo essay goes on to show her mother going to collect the baby and bring it home on the bus. And this is what drives the work, because this is happening every few minutes, is that a woman is dying in that way. So our goal is to pick up when the innovations get through the clinical trials, to put them together in a package that makes sense, and then to do the work of marketing and distributing and getting the product to the end user. That's the story of what was planted up in that up on those boats in the middle of Borneo. I think I figured out that I was of no use there, really, that I needed to be somewhere else, and that that with the use of digital marketing, digital media, and something about that woman who was finding the terrorists. A lot of these analogies have to do with warfare. You saw the war photographer, Alydia Health. These things have kind of come together, and to me, this really is it is a war. Women are bleeding to death on a different kind of front line, and there are increasing numbers of very viable solutions, including Alydia, that can make a difference. So, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Wow, that was amazing. Just a question about your decision to be for-profit versus nonprofit.
Yeah, we kind of agonized about that. I came from the nonprofit world. I was very tired of writing grants, and I had this naive concept that I wouldn't have to be begging for money anymore. I also came from that world, and I didn't want to compete. So there were a lot of new initiatives specific to maternal mortality, and I knew that the number of grants was very small. So I thought, let's not compete, let's do something different. Plus, these are products and they need to be sold. And then that was further validated when, we're working with a sub-distributor or a partner distributor in another country. They want to work with like-minded people. They want to work with another for-profit. And so we found that decision so far has been the right one. And we did have a partner nonprofit for a while, but it was too hard to do both.
Yeah. It was amazing to hear the story behind Maternova, because I actually never heard it before, but I know Maternova. I'm curious, so what's your involvement in the company now, and why you're so interested?
So I was founder and CEO for the first 9 years, and I I didn't know for sure that this would happen, but I met someone who started working for me, who I really felt had better skills than I did to be the CEO at this point in time. I don't think it would have worked earlier, but so now I have a new CEO, but I'm I'm leading the strategy. Yeah.
So obviously, you have amazing passion from working with you know, looking at now, what's something that's all the testing for the next phase?
Well, so we've proven the basic business model, and we've figured out the business model that we're making money as a distributor. So we need to do more of what we've shown we can do. We need to market and sell in different languages. So use the same model, but expand the number of markets, expand the team, expand the number of countries that we're in. But beyond that, we're executing more of a licensing strategy. I can't remember if I said that at the beginning. So we're often advising entrepreneurs very early on, and so we want to take a piece of the IP from an earlier stage and do much more there. So there's a lot of legal strategy and execution involved in that. That's the other piece of rates. For the IP strategy?
No, for the products. So you buy the products and reselling, or are you selling?
We're basically a middleman distributor.
So you buy a product first.
Well, we drop ship. We don't hold inventory, and we also have exclusives on both ends. So we have exclusives usually by territory or by continent. So the exclusive is with the supplier or the entrepreneur, or the startup or the corporate. We have one with Philips, and on the other end with the sub distributor, they can't, merely work with one person in the country, one entity. Yeah. Well, we didn't when we started, but there are a couple. There are about 10 companies that do something in obstetric and neonatal health, from Laerdal Global Health, which actually has a nonprofit arm, to Utah Medical, to Commercial Innovations, to a number of them. We are increasingly working as partners with them. So again, taking an exclusive in a particular geography, and in some cases, by labeling the product as our own. There's one company that came out of PATH that really liked what we were doing, called Via Global Health, and they're bigger in the sense they do all kinds of medical equipment. They try to sell some of these obstetric and newborn products, but they don't have the domain expertise in that.
Would you say that this is geared more towards developing countries that have, a longer travel?
That's definitely the way we started, and I meant to talk about that. We get calls from all over Canada and the US now. Yeah.
I mean, the US is so big that
yeah, and the other postpartum hemorrhage things we sell, a number of the balloon technologies were mentioned. My second obsession is with balloon technologies, which there's actually a whole book that I'll be written about the intrigue surrounding the IP for obstetric balloon technologies. So I know that sounds like a bestseller. But we sell one balloon within that is made in the US, and there are a couple others coming out that are 10 times order of magnitude cheaper. But to answer your question, not all the products are relevant in the US, but a subset of them are. And with our unfortunate status as the worst off of the industrialized nations, increasingly in areas in the South, there are no hospitals, there are no OB-GYNs, they're not even any midwives. So someone has to stabilize women on their way to higher levels of care.
Another quick question. So you focus mostly on postpartum, are there other issues you're tackling, because when you're offering other products too, what are the major issues that you're trying to address?
Yeah, so postpartum hemorrhage, eclampsia is the second leading cause of death. We have, we're working on, there's one product that was developed in the UK that's the first blood pressure cuff to ever be calibrated for pregnancy, and was developed similarly to many of these other products with 10 to 12 years of clinical trials behind it and an enormous amount of funding, but nobody knows yet about the product. So eclampsia, infection, and postpartum hemorrhage, and then in newborns, infection and pneumonia in children, diarrheal disease, some nutrition things that underlie the leading causes, most of which have to do with anemia and micronutrient disorders. Yeah.
Maybe a hypothetical question. You said you're interested in balloon technologies, and I'm assuming you were carrying some of those products. Hypothetically, you have access to Alydia's technology, which is the opposite, or kind of different. Will you keep carrying both the products, or you would stop the balloon?
We would carry both because it would take a lot. I mean, you know, something that's totally counterintuitive and innovative would be right up our alley. But it takes a long time to educate the market. So while we're trying, we and whoever else is lucky enough to be involved is working to educate people and write the journal articles and do the pilots, they still need to have something that they're comfortable with. That's what we found. Thank you, everyone.